Not sure I got put on the right side because I'm actually going to talk about how bad the media has been in some reporting. But I'm going to fold it round ingeniously. Yeah. Look, I'm very, kind of ecumenical here. But just follow me with this. I'm going to talk about reporting of sex workers and their experiences of violence. I was a sex worker. I experienced violence. And so I thought that this was a good example on to illustrate ways in which the media might be very strong in lots of ways, as Sushi and Sally have been saying, but they have some blind spots, and one of them is about sex workers. So I'd say the media probably can help prevent violence against women because they can unwittingly rather help enable it. Violence against sex workers is a topic which is a fair subject, and it does get a little bit of coverage, but is very often irresponsibly reported, snidely, dismissively, or not at all. So some common problems with media reporting. It doesn't happen. The reports don't get written. Sex worker violence is just part of that world, and the girls know what they're getting into. Excuse me, I'm going to do a lot of 80s daggy scare quotes, but it's just like that. The reporting doesn't happen because sex workers are sad, dysfunctional, drug-addicted criminals, and if they get into trouble, that's really their own problem, and that's because they're disgusting skanks. There's no story here, there's just grot. The reporting doesn't happen because sex workers live in a total vacuum, have no relationships with anyone, and live completely apart from the rest of us, and no one in our community is ever related to them or notices when they get hurt or go missing or are raped, because who cares? And speaking of rape, I should say rape, because obviously you can't rape someone who's selling her body. The reporting doesn't happen because sex workers never complain about anything because they're too fucked up. Or else, the victim is a prostitute, and that's the term that the media prefers to use, despite sex worker advocates preferring the term sex worker. And that's pretty much all you need to know. So these are some first lines and headers I pulled off the internet. For example, police are investigating the brutal daylight killing of a prostitute in St Kilda's red light district. Or a Melbourne man who raped a prostitute after holding her at knife point and threatening to kill her has been jailed for 9.5 years. Or this nice one, dead prostitute had alarming levels of cocaine. Or else we need the story to include many, many lovely salacious details about the woman's sex work history, services and reputation. Oh my God, that's my child. I recognise that call. Hold on, darling, hold on. I'm on stage. 2 minutes.
Kate unfortunately is not going to be able to come back, but she's asked me to finish off her speech. So pretend I'm Kate, and I'm going to start. I'm pretty sure she got to the bit about the dead prostitute had alarming levels of cocaine. Is that pretty much where we were? Okay, so I'm just going to pick up from where she was. Or else we need to be given many salacious details about the woman's sex work history, services, and reputation. In the case of murdered Joanna Martin, a Melbourne escort agency describes Jazzy O as the star of the iconic movie Aussie Good Girls Gone Bad, and her performance as the most XXXXXXX rated show in Melbourne. Or else there's a sad feature or op-ed story about a woman, quote-unquote, falling into prostitution, where they are inevitably assaulted and violated. It's terribly sad, yes, tisk tisk, but what can you do? If only they could be rescued and saved from the life of vice, because surely all sex workers hate and resent their work, but are too feeble to make any choices or find exit strategies. Really, they are so selfish or deluded. If they get into trouble, it's practically their own fault. In any case, in a sense, it's too late because they are already no longer women or people, they are now prostitutes, and really that's all you need to know about them. Or else, there are more in sorrow than anger mentions of society's sterner attempts to get her to see the error of her ways, which alas, she did not take, and now look, she's dead. For example, this lovely non sequitur, which follows at least a quote from a friend mentioning that the dead woman had actually been a nice person. Quote, Ms. Connolly had been charged several times for street sex work. This last quote is from an Age report on the murder of Tracy Connolly. She was killed in 2013 by a man in St Kilda in the van she lived in with her partner. Some commentators, such as Wendy Squires, commendably made pointed and lengthy note on the contrast between public reaction to Connolly's death and that of Jill Mager. Public reaction was duly ignited and there was a candlelight vigil for Connolly, and another a year later. It was good to see that after some hesitation and bamboozlement, the media were able to recognize that even a sex worker can be mourned. At least a kindly, attractive, and noticed sex worker with a grieving partner can be. Too bad if you're Asian or Islander, don't have all your teeth, are overweight or old, or don't work in the neighborhood of a prominent columnist. But it's the problem I point out that is not that sex worker violence isn't sad. It's that it's either unrated or sensationalized by the media. When it's reported, it's done dismissively in a brutal shorthand that reduces a whole complex person to a largely despised figure, strips out any particulars, shoves the story back into a tired old narrative silhouette, i.e. she got what she had coming, and commits a secondary assault on her privacy and her dignity. At this point, I could quote from a detailed and pitiless report of exactly how Joanna Martin's body and clothing was positioned when she was found, but I'd rather not. Reporting on violence against sex workers also has a tendency to helpfully assume that victims were hurt because they were sex workers. She was a whore. Obviously, she was whoring at the time. Apparently, it's almost inevitable that sex workers get hurt because it's a dirty, dark, illicit world. Actually, much of it's decriminalized and regulated, complete with invasive health monitoring and a GST bureaucracy. It's almost inevitable that sex workers get hurt because they're different to normal women, and it's no surprise, really, is it? It's almost inevitable that sex workers get hurt because they choose to make themselves vulnerable and to ignore those who want to help and rescue them. And because they go into rooms alone. And because, well, you only need to say prostitute and possibly drugs with a question mark if necessary, and attach it only to an incident featuring scandal, squalor, or crime, and the story writes itself. What if the problem, though, actually isn't the women working in sex work, but the men who choose to hurt them? I think it's clear the media can help prevent violence against women. Once they stop supporting the idea that sex workers matter less than other women, that violence against sex workers isn't really quite as bad as violence against other women, that it's reasonable that the men who commit violence are mere shadows in the story while the victim is splayed in the press for all to see, and that violence is just what happens to sex workers. Because if they stopped encouraging that idea, maybe it wouldn't be. So let's give a hand to Kate.